This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Ayan Silver. Today we ask J.R. Ross to unpack the latest in state and federal government. Ross is editor of WizPolitics.com. Welcome, J.R. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right, so last week, Republican President Donald Trump declared a national emergency over illegal immigration and is trying to end birthright citizenship, which provides that babies born in the U.S. are U.S. citizens, regardless of the citizenship of their parents. It's been temporarily blocked in the federal courts. Where are Wisconsin Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, on Trump's efforts?
Well, Republicans, I haven't seen anybody from Wisconsin criticizing the president for this order. Some have really enthusiastically embraced it. You know, Democrats picked this as a spot to kind of push back. If you look big picture in immigration, it was obviously an issue in the fall election. Democrats are kind of on their heels on the issue. The question is, how are they going to respond? There's a little bit of polling I've seen so far about this executive order suggests people generally support in this country the idea of birthright citizenship. So it seems like Attorney General Josh Kaul, government attorneys are on solid ground with their move here to challenge that executive order. I mean, there's obviously the bigger question legally of whether a president by executive order can nick something in the Constitution or interpret something in the Constitution or change its meaning. But they seem on solid ground, the public at least. The question for Democrats, though, is what else immigration? Where's their line going to be going forward and how they approach this issue?
You mentioned that Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul's Wisconsin Department of Justice has joined a challenge against Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. He's in a coalition of 17 other states and 2 cities. Is there anything you can tell us about that lawsuit in particular?
Well, we've got one judge, they live in Washington State, federal judge, who's issued a temporary stay of that executive order, saying it was, I think in his words, blatantly unconstitutional. So there's that. This is going to play out for a while. You have the appeals court process, possibly in the U.S. Supreme Court. So don't expect a quick resolution to that one. But it's going to be an interesting fight for Evers and Kaul. You know, again, what's that line going to be? The governor is State of the State this past week was talking about reminding people Wisconsin was built by immigrants. He has said before that, for example, he believes the dairy industry would collapse in Wisconsin without immigrant labor, that there's some real concerns he has if there were mass deportations, everybody hear that documentation. So it's going to be an issue that's going to percolate for a while. Again, the question for Democrats is how do they navigate that? Because Republicans have the upper hand right now, with the public at least, on that issue.
Are attorney generals now in the country kind of the first line of defense for Democrats against the Trump administration? And what would you expect from Kaul's DOJ? How would you expect him to respond to other executive orders and policies from the Trump administration?
Yeah, it's no different than Republican attorneys general were the first line of defense against Joe Biden when he was in office. We see this play out, you know, regardless of who's in office in D.C., that there are regularly lawsuits by people of the opposite party trying to challenge these things. So for Kaul, you know, where do you want to pick your battles? Don't forget, there's always politics involved in everything that happens in politics, surprise, or government. And Josh Kaul is either going to be up for election in 2026 or perhaps seeking another office, unless he surprises us and doesn't run again. But he's going to navigate that election in 26 with this in the background. So he's got to keep that in mind, people I talk to, about what his priorities are and how it plays to the public, because, again, politics are part of everything.
And is there anything you're eyeing in terms of lawsuits that Wisconsin might be jumping onto?
It just depends on how far Trump goes. Like, you know, he talked about a shock and awe initial first week, how many hundreds of executive orders that he signed. So where do you pick your battle? Like, what's a fruitful battle to pick on things that the president has signed, and what's going to be something that you can really kind of challenge successfully?
And what are you hearing from immigrants' rights activists, progressives, and Democrats? You're hearing a lot of activists talk about how MPD, the Milwaukee County Sheriff, can only share information with ICE when a person is suspected of terrorism or gang activity or violent felonies, not in the cases of less serious crimes. So is that something you're hearing around the state? And what else are you hearing?
There's a real concern about what these things could mean for people and how their daily lives. You know, kids who are in school who aren't documented, getting health care. I mean, you go on down the line. And it's interesting, too, in talking to people in the Capitol, they know that Democrats, they don't see Democrats wanting to abandon like their base, the Democratic base is not where Donald Trump is on immigration, right? So look at Tammy Baldwin and this vote on the Lake and Riley Act. That was a bill seeking to require the federal government that if somebody without documentation is arrested on theft, that they are detained. It refers to a University of Georgia student who was killed by somebody suspected of being here illegally. Okay, so Baldwin voted to advance that bill and allow debate to go forward, hoping to amend it, in her words. Then, on final passage, she voted against the bill. It was an interesting approach in talking to people that Baldwin took there because, on the one hand, if she voted against advancing the bill and Democrats killed it there, that could be a problem for Democrats in general, that, not even going to try and entertain this issue. But Baldwin, joined the effort, allowed it to advance in the end. So though it wasn't changed enough to kind of satisfy my concerns, you can send a message to everybody of like, look, I hear you about immigration being important, but we also need to, in her mind, address these things and try and find a more perfect solution. The question going forward is going to be, is there an actual bipartisan solution on immigration in this country? Will it be done by executive order? Can they do it in D.C. by reconciliation? Remember, reconciliation is a process where you typically it's basically about spending. And there's some real questions because you only need a simple majority in the Senate to pass a bill like that, not the 60-vote threshold to break a filibuster. There's a real question about whether some of these immigration policies will qualify as a fiscal item in these reconciliation bills and pass muster with the parliamentarians. So, it's going to be interesting to watch if Republicans try to just jam it through in that regard, or if there actually is a bipartisan push to put things in a law rather than doing things by executive order, as President Trump has done so far.
You're tuned into Capitol Notes. I'm WUWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. So last week, Democratic Governor Tony Evers gave his State of the State address. He was asking for things like a 48-hour waiting period on gun purchases, investment in public schools, mental health funding for students. Republican Assembly Majority Leader Tyler August responded to it by saying he's, quote, not sure what planet the governor is living on, while GOP Speaker Robin Vos said the speech was, quote, full of liberal wishes, empty promises, and a whole lot of things that are not going to happen in Wisconsin. Did anything come out of the State of the State that will lead to bipartisanship?
Good question. We've seen a pattern with the governor, Republican lawmakers in the past, where he proposes a whole bunch of stuff, and they say no. And in talking to people about the speech the last few days, they kind of said it's actually not a bad place the governor to be in, which might sound kind of odd to say, but bear with me here that, the governor can talk about things that are very popular. Granted, Robin Vos calls it a liberal wish list, but people generally support red flag laws, for example, if you look at the polls. They're there with the governor, a lot of these things, on his call for historic investment education. They support things like that. So the governor can go out there and say, hey, I'm pushing these big things that I support that are popular with you, the general public. It's those darn lawmakers, they won't pass it. Then he can also go out and talk about the tax cuts Republicans sent him that he signed, which drives Republicans crazy, by the way. He takes credit for what they see are their tax cuts.
Yeah, I saw Robin Vos shaking his head no while Evers was talking about those tax cuts.
Yeah. Yes, example A. So, but for the governor, you can go out, look, remember Harry Truman, the doing in Congress in 1948, that election, and you can run against legislatures saying, hey, look, they're the problem. They're the ones in the way of all these things I like and you like, without having to actually pay for them by putting them into a budget, right, getting it done, because you have to actually deal with the implementation of those things. So he can, if he runs, which is still an if in 2026, he can go out there and say, look, here's what I would do if you give me a shot with a democratically controlled legislature, all the things that you like. And oh, by the way, I've signed all these tax cuts. We've gone from being in the top 5 20 years ago to now 35th state local tax burden. Look what we've done, accomplished. And so it's an okay place for the governor to be, even if he's not getting what he wants done. He can talk about these things and get the public going, okay, I see what the governor wants. Now, do I want to buy into it for another 4 years if he runs in 2026?
And we got a little bit more insight about what Vos and, Republican leadership wants to do this year. I think they were a little bit more clear about what they were intending to do than in previous press conferences and things like that. Vos said that Republicans are going to focus on 3 things: high educational standard with any increase in funding for schools, making sure that if someone is here illegally and commits a crime, they're going to be deported by cooperating with ICE, and 3, not growing the size of government. He says Republicans want to give tax relief of almost $1,000 to every person in Wisconsin. Was there anything new in that announcement or anything that, is going to be, kind of give more insight into how Republicans are going to operate?
Well, speaking of popular things, those three things tend to play well with voters. The question is how Republicans execute them. So let's start with the immigration bill. Haven't seen the details of it yet. Don't know if the governor would sign it. There's also a political component there. There are a lot of new Democrats in the Assembly and the Senate who won races in November. It could put them on record about how they feel on that topic, which sometimes comes up in campaign ads looking down the road. There's that. With the tax cut stuff, it's going to be interesting to see is can Robin Vos, the Speaker, and Devin LeMahieu, the Senate Majority Leader, agree on what the tax cut should be? We've been told by them that they want to do a tax cut bill before the budget. Now the budget has to be done until, start of summer, so there's some time there. But here we are, end of January. We don't have a tax bill yet from Republican lawmakers. What's their plan? Robin Vos has talked about doing retirement income. Devin LeMahieu has talked about doing an across-the-board income tax cut. So there's that. Also, speaking of things that won't get done, the governor, from people I talked to, would likely not sign a tax cut bill outside the budget. If you do that, you give up your leverage with Republican lawmakers, right? Like Evers wants more education spending, more priorities that he's talked about in the speech from last week. If he signs their tax cut bill before the budget, what would Republicans' incentive be to work with Evers on his priorities that they're not necessarily on board with, right? So don't expect the governor to sign a tax cut bill before the budget. If anything, we're going to push for it to be included as part of the negotiations. And the question becomes, what can they agree on? What can get done in this session? Because so far, there's some real questions in Madison about Republican leadership and the numbers they have, what they can agree on between the two houses and get done with their numbers, which have dwindled compared to last session when it was a supermajority in the Senate and a near supermajority in the Assembly. Now they're kind of much narrower. So it's going to be more difficult to keep everyone on board on some big ticket stuff.
It seems like Evers applauds some tax cuts, but says, then he vetoes some of the Republican tax cuts because he says the state can't afford them because they're fiscally irresponsible and they'd leave Wisconsin unable to fund education and healthcare and public safety and aid to local governments. Republicans say that they deserve credit for the tax cuts and that Democrats aren't doing enough on that and that all Democrats want to do is spend, spend, spend. So it seems like both parties seem to agree that they want the state to have good schools, they want mental health access, they want economic relief. Why then is there such Republicans not even moving their hands for a clap for Evers or this rancor in the state government?
Yeah, they just don't agree on the big things, and they've had a broken relationship for a long time. I mean, it goes back to before Evers took office. Remember, there was a lame duck session in December of 2018 where Republicans then, with Scott Walker still in office, passed a bunch of laws to kind of undercut the authority of Tony Evers and Josh Kaul. That didn't make those two guys happy. Evers got into office. There was a lawsuit over those decisions that were made before he took office. He rescinded a bunch of appointments of Republican appointees, which made Republicans unhappy. There have been various little disputes back and forth. Some of the governor's office particularly taped a conversation with Robin Vos and the then majority leader in the Senate, Scott Fitzgerald. I mean, it's just been one slight after another. That relationship has been broken for a long time. They did come together in 2023 to do a big education package, a package for shared revenue, state aid to local governments. They've gotten the Brewers Stadium deal done, other stuff. So they've done some stuff. But for the most part, Robin Vos and Tony Evers live in very different blocks when it comes to how things should be done. And there's no signs at all that they're getting along better than they were before.
Do you think it's like that in almost every state house these days in the United States?
I can't speak to other places, but I can tell you that the polarization that we see nationally is filtered down to the states, and things become more polarized. People have noted to me as the media has become more nationalized. We unfortunately have fewer and fewer local sources all the time. That means there's more and more national news filtering into your home every day, which means there's a national perspective and spin on stuff, and that basically kind of reinforces those partisan divides a little bit in our local stuff. It's just been a general sea change in how we approach stuff at the state level the last couple of years.
Interesting. Well, we'll see if the legislators this year and next year can get anything done. Thanks for the breakdown, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on Lake Effect, and check out the Capital Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.